And Israel pounds Gaza with deadly airstrikes as it takes back control of border areas, displacing more than 100,000 Palestinians. Israel's military says that it's recovered the bodies of 1,500 Hamas militants since the surprise attack 4 days ago.
And for more on the war between Israel and Hamas, Yazid Sayed joins us live from Boston. He's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Middle East Center. Mr. Sayed, just earlier in the bulletin, we spoke to our correspondent. She said, looking at what's happening on the ground, you expect a full ground offensive being launched in 24 to 48 hours. Prime Minister Netanyahu has promised to change the Middle East. Now, those are ominous words. To what does he want to change the Middle East?
I think that Netanyahu is basically filling up time. This is a placeholder rhetoric, declaring war, promising to destroy Hamas forever. All these things, you can understand them from an emotional perspective, but politically, I think the Israeli political leadership and the military command have been exposed as having no policy on Gaza, which has led to this terrible situation. And I think, moreover, they have no strategy. I don't think they really know what to do with Gaza right now. They're filling up with airstrikes and bombing and a lot of very belligerent rhetoric, imposing a complete end to the entry of food, medication, water, electricity, anything to the Gaza Strip. All of which I think just goes to try and obscure the fact that they're now having to invent a strategy on the hoof. And that there will be ground action, I think, is inevitable, not so much for military reasons, because the Israeli army, in past rounds of fighting with Hamas, has almost always held back from going in on the ground for very practical, tactical, and operational reasons.
Mr. Sayed,
I don't think this is something they like.
I'll pick up on the ground offensive, but for now, let's pick up on the earlier point you made. It's easy now to say that Israel did not have a policy on the Gaza Strip. But from 2014, from the conclusion of Operation Protective Edge, did Israel between 2014 and now realize it had no policy and was trying at least to build some kind of basic policy on the Gaza Strip?
Well, Israel clearly has had some sort of policy in the sense that they like the status quo, one in which Israel says that officially it no longer occupies the Gaza Strip, though from the perspective of international law, it remains in belligerent occupation since it controls exit and entry and so on. But more importantly, the Israeli attitude was every few years we'll mow the lawn. And this is a term that the Israeli officials often use, which involves military action that usually ends up killing several hundred Palestinian militants, a few thousand Palestinian civilians, and then there's a ceasefire. And the hope was always that Hamas would somehow live with the situation and maintain the peace on Israel's behalf. So that was a sort of non-policy. It's a status quo policy. That, I think, is gone forever now. The problem for Israel is whether it's justified or not, whatever it does next, I think won't resolve that particular problem, which is once the guns fall silent, whether Israel has reoccupied the entirety of the Gaza Strip, whether they've killed all Hamas leaders, whatever they do, what are they going to do with Gaza? And for that, there still is no Israeli answer. And so, a lot of thunder and fury right now, but then what?
So this ground offensive, to take out Hamas, but not to weaken it so much that Hamas itself becomes a hollow power structure, because who can take the place of Hamas in the Gaza Strip right now? So the ground offensive, is it possible that it could be very targeted, very disciplined, so that it just weakens but does not entirely destroy? Because I do not think, or you can correct me there, Israel wants to return to occupying the Gaza Strip, which it left in 2005.
Well, that's a very pertinent question. And, we're talking about a territory that I think is something like the area of Singapore, 45 kilometers long by 10 to 15 kilometers wide at its widest, and with 2 million people in there. So it's densely built up areas, very poor construction, immense poverty. And so going in on the ground, we're not talking about Ukraine with vast expanses. We're talking about this very built-up environment. And both for Israeli soldiers going in house to house and for the Palestinian civilian population, this kind of battle is going to be horrendously costly. So I think Israel will, at the end of the day, come up with other ways in which there is some entry on the ground, because there's a political reason. I think the political and military command in Israel need to show their population that they're doing something. And everyone has this sort of instinctive feeling that going in on the ground is more meaningful, more effective. Whether they'll actually go house to house throughout the entirety of the Gaza Strip, I very much doubt. However, anything that leaves Hamas intact at the end of the day won't work either.
And a final question here, Mr. Sayer. For every analyst who says a ground offensive is the only way to deter other groups such as Hezbollah, there is another analyst who says that's exactly what will draw Hezbollah into this conflict and therefore escalate and widen what's already a very destructive war. Final question.
I think there's a lot of logic to that, but there's a big difference between a battle in Lebanon, because Lebanon is a sovereign country, and therefore Israel can deal with it in a different way. Gaza is entirely under Israeli control, albeit from outside the border, through the control of the access of food, water, electricity, internet, money, anything and everything you can think of. So Israel can't sort of, as it were, stand back from Gaza or from responsibility for what it's producing in Gaza. And therefore, it needs a solution, but that solution involves letting go. And I think that's something Israel so far has been unwilling to do either.
Oh, thanks very much for joining us this evening. That was Yazid Sayer, senior fellow at the Carnegie Middle East Center. Mr. Yazid Sayer.